The 2024 presidential campaign is taking shape, but of course, before we get there, we need to get through the primaries. Our Sally Hernandez sat down with The Hill to give us some insight on what's going to be a packed Republican primary.
Looking at the Republican Party, former President Trump is facing legal trouble. How could this affect his bid for president in 2024? We've also seen Trump and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis go back and forth. So we want to bring in Michael Schnell with The Hill to talk a little bit about what we can expect. Good morning, Michael.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Okay, let's talk about his run coming up. Do we think that DeSantis stands a chance against Trump?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely a possibility, and it's not would not be fair to count him out just yet because, of course, Ron DeSantis has not even yet officially jumped into the race. He's been publicly flirting with the campaign. There's been a lot of speculation that he will join the Republican primary. He suggested earlier this year that he wouldn't jump in the race, or rather make a decision about 2024 until the Florida legislative session was over. That has ended this month. So now the clock is running and ticking for Ron DeSantis to make a decision and officially get into this race. Now, a number of polls have shown him trailing behind former President Trump and not really making too strong of inroads against the former president, who, of course, is already running. But look, DeSantis, again, has not yet jumped into the race. It's very possible that he has not yet fully unveiled actually, it's very likely that he has not yet unveiled his political operation and his campaign operation. So I'm sure there's much to be seen. And then you also talked about DeSantis as a governor, which is obviously the experience he's going to be drawing upon as a candidate. He's a very popular governor down in Florida. So I think that DeSantis absolutely has a chance. It'll really be interesting to see how it plays out once he gets in the race.
I've been seeing some already attack ads for President Trump against DeSantis. And as you mentioned, DeSantis not even officially entering his name into the hat yet.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Former President Trump already taking on DeSantis. And it's a little, DeSantis hasn't really gone into the fray too much in terms of responding to Trump as these attacks and talking about his stature as a candidate. You'll remember a couple of weeks ago, I believe he was doing an international swing in Japan, and he was asked about his trailing poll numbers compared to former President Trump. DeSantis says, yeah, well, look, I'm not a candidate. So that was sort of his way of deflecting from the question. Once DeSantis jumps into the race, he's not going to be able to do that, obviously. He will have to take on these attacks from Trump head on. It's very possible that he will sling some back at the former president, and it's also a possibility that Trump could up this criticism of DeSantis. So a lot to potentially come once his bid becomes official.
Michael, I wanted to ask you about former U.S. Rep here in Texas from San Antonio, Will Hurd. Been seeing him on the talk show rounds, possibly teasing that he may want to enter into the race. What are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, doing the Sunday show circuit and being a fixture on cable news is always an early indication, potentially, that someone could be interested in a political race or rejoining the political scene. Obviously, we've seen Will Hurd do that. We saw him on the Sunday show circuit this weekend, sort of teasing a potential 2024 bid. Listen, I think that we'll have to see if he ends up jumping in the race. He was one of the few Republicans before he decided not to run for re-election. He was one of the few Republicans to take on former President Trump, to criticize former President Trump. Just this weekend, he said that a rematch between Trump and Biden would be, quote, a rematch from hell. So look, maybe he thinks that he's the alternative candidate who can come in here and shake things up and change the political scene. I think we'll have to wait and see. But I think that this also speaks to, the saturated nature of the Republican primary for 2024. There are already a number of candidates running. Former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, former President Trump. There's questions about whether Mike Pence will run. As we're talking, if DeSantis will run, someone like Will Hurd, maybe Chris Christie has been flirting with the campaign. I think that we're going to see a very crowded Republican primary field, and it'll be really interesting to see how all these candidates, act with former President Trump are also in the race, because of course he is the most popular figure right now in the Republican Party, and he's leading all the polls.
Michael Schnell with The Hill. We always appreciate you. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me.